Katmai, Alaska, the ancestral lands of the Inupiaq people and home to glaciers, volcanoes, salmon, wolves, moose, and bears. So many bears. Big bears, fat bears, wet bears, angry bears, little bears. Their footprints crisscross all over this landscape, which is interesting because there's hardly any evidence of humans here. No evidence aside from the thousands and thousands of pounds of human trash that washes up here every year from across the world. And that's what this boat full of people from all over the world was here to address, trying to recover that trash before it broke up into the ecosystem. I came along with a sketchbook to try to capture the big picture, but mostly, I was here for the shoes. Now, each year, over 20 billion pairs of shoes gets made. That's an incomprehensibly big number. I mean, if you were to stack those, they would be able to reach to the moon. Twice. With plenty of shoes left over. But it's not how many shoes we make that brought me to Katmai, Alaska. It's the fact that we don't really know what to do with them once we're done.
I would love to go barefoot like all the time, but unfortunately we are not very good made as animals.
This is Killian. He knows a lot about shoes because he's pushed them further than almost any human on Earth.
We don't have enough protection to walk on rocks or on snow or on ice, and we feel cold a lot, our feet bleed, so yeah, we need shoes.
I've spent a lot of time following in the footsteps of runners who are trying to break records no one has ever broken before. So I've had this front row seat to watch them do the impossible. But when I look back on it, these races are just made out of normal steps. Normal steps that all add up to a remarkable result. But it wasn't until recently that I started to think about the shoes that make those steps possible, and what happens to them once we're done. See, most shoes take a really long time to decompose, or might never decompose, because they're made out of just a lot of really, really long words. But what that means is that a lot of the shoes we've had are probably still out there, and some of those might actually be on their way to Alaska, following ocean currents on one of the craziest odysseys a piece of trash could ever go on. I wanted to see where these shoes ended up after riding those ocean currents for so long. So I figured it was time for me to get on a boat and go in search of their final destination, where the path of some lost shoes ends. It's not easy to get to Katmai for anyone or anything. Even though I live in Alaska, it still required a lot of travel and a 12-hour boat trip to even get there, which is probably why I find it so surprising that these discarded shoes from halfway across the world can just end up in one of the most remote places on Earth. But here we were. So, where were they? Everything we could see from the tide line looked pristine. But woven into this landscape was a buffet of garbage from all over the world. Once you saw it, you would find it everywhere. Everything from plastic bottles to buckets, jugs, hard hats, pill bottles, bottle caps, deodorant, styrofoam, buoys, whatever this thing is, the occasional helpful cleaning supplies, and eventually, shoes. Or shoe, in this case. Its soulmate could be floating anywhere near Antarctica or Hawaii by this point, but this one ended up in Katmai, Alaska, with a few bite marks along the way that could have been from a turtle. And at first, it made me really mad. Seeing a shoe in a wild place like this just felt unnatural. But I couldn't really blame the ones who made the shoe, or the person who threw it away, because I've had so many like it. But with my shoes, once I was done with them, it just felt like they were gone. Out of sight, out of mind. Maybe I thought they were in a landfill, but never on a far-off beach making footprints of their own. And I'm sure whoever had this shoe could never have dreamed where it would go after them. But here it was, and all I could think about was the hundreds of shoes that I've worn through and thrown out.
Oh, found another one.
But that shoe is just how it started, because once we found one, we began to see them everywhere. I had expected to find shoes, but not quite so many. They were from all over, not one particular brand or one particular style. But the most concerning ones, by far, were the shoes that we weren't finding.
In my undergrad, I studied microplastic ingestion in fish, and that's like where I started studying fish, was through that lens. So these, like, oh, hey, I found half a sole for you. It looks very degraded, but yes, like here's the heel. Shoes can definitely also become microplastics or any microfiber. If it's left out in the environment long enough, it'll be broken down into smaller and smaller pieces. And certain parts of the shoe will degrade faster than others. So like a lot of what we've seen here is that we've seen a lot of soles left over, whereas the rest of the shoe may still be floating out in the ocean or has sunk down to the bottom. Like it can be broken down, but it's just gonna be broken down into tinier and tinier and tinier plastic fragments, and it just accumulates. Like everything that we make right now has a lifetime. So ultimately, it feels like at this point, all of my shoes would end up being in a place like this, which is really sad to think about.
I ran all the way here, but now I can't see the reasons. I try too hard to make a better reality. So I ran all the way here, just for the chance that you'd come to.
This was getting so messy, both on the page and in my head. I thought picking up lost shoes could be a simple solution, but the more I learned and the more we picked up, the bigger and more complex this problem seemed to get. And for every shoe that we found, there were countless more pieces that we'd never be able to collect, already working their way into the environment. I mean, what were we supposed to do to keep shoes ending up in a place like this? If I could just magically scoop everything out of the ocean, I would, but what about the 20 billion pairs of shoes made this year, and probably even more the next? Now that I knew what to look for, the impacts were everywhere. Reaching a shoe-free ocean began to feel impossible. But maybe I've been looking at it upside down the whole time. Maybe instead of focusing on that impossible goal, I could have been focusing on those regular, normal, unremarkable steps that add up to do the impossible. Buying shoes that will last longer and repairing and reusing them is one place to start. We also need to close the loop, diverting shoes out of landfills by repairing and recycling them into something new. And all this while making these actions and this cycle something that's just normal. Now these aren't exactly going to get us over the finish line, but at this point we just need those regular steps, the ones that keep us moving toward that goal of a path home for every single shoe.
our footprints, they are no good or bad, it's just how we use them to advance towards one or other direction.
It's one thing to push shoes faster or further than almost anyone on Earth, but the biggest challenge might not be found on the way to a summit or in a race. It could just be trying to make sure that our shoes don't keep on making footprints without us.
If we want to be living in this planet for long, we need to walk like we walk in the sand of the beach or in the snow, where the footprints are only temporary.